maybe that's one way. Okay, everything I'm trying to do is to get out of that frame. You see, that's why I can't get stuck in that again. I'm trying to answer a question, which is like this. Maybe it's the same question like I said last time. This is the third shir in this sort of shtickle Torah. It's one long shtickle Torah. It's one long shtickle. It's only all the did agdome. Basically, let's try to get to where we are. We're trying to answer the kashrut. We're trying to figure out a structure, a way of thinking. The kasha is more or less, in the most simple way, why and how did proving God's existence and knowing about Him in an intellectual way, in some sort of intellectual way, why was that a good thing and a good enough thing for the Rambam as a representative of a certain stream of thought, and not a good thing for some reason doesn't work for us, right? That's the big problem. And I believe that until we solve this problem, until we have a way, we don't really know how to read Rambam or any of these stream of thought, because obviously to them this is something that works in many different ways, and to us it seems like the Hanucha Kedima, the assumption of most of us, that it doesn't work for some reason. It might work somewhat for the most minimal thing of Damash Tushv Lapakoris, of saying, that Mr. Dawkins is wrong. It might work for something else. I don't know. Not sure it's even interesting for anything else. I think that's the only thing it's interesting for, and I'm not so interested in that. It might work for one more thing, which is the internal Dharmash Tushv Lapakoris, right? Because we try to say that religion is not about being dumb. There's you could have a reasonable epistemology that only accepts things on evidence and still believe in God. Okay, but basically the same thing. Okay. Or it doesn't seem to be useful for anything else. And we're trying to dig through, firstly, maybe to describe what the problem is, and to try to find where, and what is Tuli, right? What is it about? What happened to change this? And then we could try to think of what the remedy would be, right? What the answer would be, right? Now, we sort of went through 3 different things, and just try to make a list, right? The first thing, which again, maybe there are 3 descriptions of the problem, right? 3 descriptions of the question. But there are 3 pointers that point us to places where to try to search, try to understand what we're missing, right? The first one is what I call the question of devotion, or in other words, the most simple way of saying this, and this is an important way of saying it. Yiddish, maybe discuss a little more about this, and that, we could say it from both ways, right? We could say philosophy, doing philosophy in the sense that we have it, right, was divorced from praxis, divorced from doing anything at all. That's the Torah of, I keep on saying, Alain Badiou, which wrote the book, the guy that wrote the book, Philosophy as a Way of Life. Alain Badiou, I think his name was, a French guy, and he tried to explain how philosophy was always a thing to do, not a thing to know. Right, the big difference is, this is important to me, the big difference is that it's something that needs live people, right? Philosophy in the ancient way, the way he described the ancient way, is basically a religion. In other words, it's a way of living. The philosopher's big claim is that the best way to live is to live the intellectual life, which means to do philosophy. It doesn't mean that philosophy is the project of describing the world in the most accurate way, or assembling an encyclopedia of knowledge for the library, which is sort of the academic way of looking at knowledge. And we're somehow serving that encyclopedia by adding more pieces and taking out mistakes and so on, but it's not something that has to happen to you, right? There's thousands of nafkaminas that come out of this, but that's the basic thing. So from that perspective, philosophy stopped being, it became very academic in the sense of not being about people, in the sense of not being about practice. And then, of course, it's hard to understand what was the point of that, right? That's one thing. The way I described it in Tuesday was that basically the ancient philosophers believe about philosophy what the Yeshivish believe about Nushim Nazikin, right? And it's very important to realize this, because I don't think the yeshivas are totally nuts. This goes back to another question. Because the Yeshivish world they really believe that the person was created to be noise of a noise, not to know the right halacha, right? They're not assembling any kind of knowledge. There's a criticism that people make of Yeshiva, right? They're not interested in finding out the halacha. They're not interested in finding out the truth, even in a certain sense. They're not interested in deciding which pshat is right. They're not interested in making some kind of codex of halacha. They're not interested in deciding halacha practical. They're not interested in practical wisdom at all. They're not interested in halacha, right? Even the halacha that they're learning things that are the most halacha the guy halacha parts of Shas, and they don't care about halacha at all, which is the funniest thing ever. But basically, and this makes sense. This is basically philosophy. This is the shitza philosophy. In just with changing the subject, but in the concept, this is the concept of philosophy, which says that the highest human good, the highest value, in other words, the closest thing to perfection, is being a philosopher, being a lamb, exactly like the teacher in yeshiva, Torah Lishma. And there's obviously people in yeshiva that seems to make sense to them, right? They're not crazy, maybe. The only real difference would be that at least the Jewish philosophers like the Rambam and his fans would say that there's a huge problem here, that it's not intellect in itself. See, this is again something that seems to be, we have to put this in another thing that gets confused, but they would definitely say that you are correct that a person was created to practice abstract reasoning. But that's not separated from the content of it. It's not that a person, and this is very important because people keep on asking this on the Rambam, and it seems like the yeshivas take the question and ran with it, which is the funniest thing, because just haltzmit, right, to make sense, because people always ask one of the things, and this is again another way of asking the question, right? One way of asking the question was, why does this not lead to devotion? And I said that one reason for that is that our conception of philosophy is divorced of any conception of a way of life, right? So let's machen also. The big question is, right? Basically, I'm just saying. Okay, now there's one way. Whatever, how we write devotion? I'm sorry. Alright, then we put in the middle concept. I'm sorry that I don't know how to type in English. Well, I know, but it's going to take longer. And the third one was okay. Right, and now over here we said that mitzad echad. Right. Yeah. Now we're trying to say something interesting, which is to try to figure this out, because. And again, in the Rambam's version, philosophy is not academic, and it is academic in the sense that he cares about what subject it is. You see, so you can't say something, and these people keep on saying that the Rambam says you go to Gan Eden. This is another way of asking the question, right? For example, right? The Rambam makes sense. Right? We tried to paint this picture about Ichas. It makes sense that Gan Eden is that, and people right away ask, okay, so Gan Eden is math, so learning math takes you to Gan Eden. Learning people think that this is a kasha. You see, for some reason this is a kasha. The Rambam says that Masa Merkova is Masa Barash is science. Yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah. What's wrong? But you see, there's a. Now, of course, we could just say, okay, you're historically wrong. You don't understand the Rambam, and the Rambam's view. That's knowing God. That's important. But there's, I think, you see where my whole thing here is trying to find what is actually the thing that causes people to go, yeah. There's always an assumption underlying that. There's something going on, some theory, some framework. And I think that one of the frameworks here is that there's a big confusion about what philosophy actually is. So one way of showing this confusion is to say philosophy is not academic, it's actually a practice. And a very cool way of showing it is that it's like what the yeshivas believe about Torah, and not like what the colleges believe about Torah, or what some guy that goes to get a smicha program believes about Torah. Right? That's the big the clearest way to show the chilek of what BMG believes, because that BMG doesn't believe in smicha. They don't believe that you ever graduate Torah, right? Doesn't make sense to them. Maybe they'll make space for it if someone needs a job, or if they need someone to pass shalos, but like not what they're about, right? We're about learning forever. And it actually makes sense. And it actually makes sense. By the way, it actually makes sense to them that they're going to do this in Gan Eden too. Like the Yeshivas, they say that in Gan Eden there's Ashtendim, with the Kaveh, or whatever, and that's perfect, right? No, they're not crazy, but you could laugh at it because, you have a very impoverished view of Tanakh, of Gan Eden, but it's not. They're not entirely crazy. Only, and like I said, this guy.
So how you the Rambam?
Wait, because the Rambam believes very similarly. This is just to show. This is just to illustrate the difference between knowledge as a means to an end. Knowledge, not the act of knowledge, like the act of learning as the means to an end, which would the yeshiva is called Torah Lishma, and knowledge as an end in itself. The act of knowledge, the act of the Havman, not like he'll ask, what's the point of the whole Masech is getting if we don't know how to make a get? They don't care about how to make a get at all. They care about the concept of a get, and they think that that's what you're about. And similarly, very similarly, people ask, and this is where it gets tricky, right? Very similarly, people ask, and you get this question: what's the point of doing philosophy about God? Is there a God or isn't there? You got a God in the end. What did he tell you to do? Tachlis. And this whole way of thinking,
that's the
Yeshivish people will ask you about philosophy, but why don't they think about the same question themselves? You see, there's something going on, right? People ask you this question, right? Not people. You get this, even the people that are against philosophy.
The reason, like a lot of people aren't bothered by any.
Because what's the point? What am I going to do with it?
How you know it's a God? I don't know. There are enough people that went through this. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, but that's one example, right? Right.
I'm confident enough that it's
right.
true,
And then what's the teretz? And what do I say? That you're worried about a different thing, right? Because just like when they learn Gittin in the yeshiva, they don't say, well, either we don't know how to make a get, or we do how to make a get, or we'll just rely on the guy that says that he knows. Because their object, what they're looking for, is not knowing how to make a get. They're not interested in that at all. And when you reduce things to that question, they look at there's no way to talk with. There's no language to even discuss this question because they're not even interested in that. And very similarly, and that's why it's a good illustration. Very similarly for the Rambam, he's not. That's why he's not here about finding out if there's a God. Not that he's not. See, this over here. This is what it gets tricky. Of course, he is, but in a very similar way to the yeshiva is not interested in finding out how a get works. Of course, they're interested in finding out how a get works, right?
Before he started philosophy, he already knew that. He should listen to God.
You could say that. That's another way of saying it. That's an old way of showing how the practice of doing philosophy is not the practice of finding out the truth. Finding out the truth. It is about finding out the truth, but it's not about the halucha l'mas. It's not like, what can I do with it? Can I daven with it? Can I do a mitzvah? Halucha l'mas. That's as dumb as going to the yeshiva guy and saying, okay, the halucha l'mas is there maskuna. And of course, there's a valid criticism of the yeshivas that says this. Maybe the Chazon Ish says, well, what's the point? If you're not doing halucha, what's the point?
But even Chazon Ish wasn't the point. I mean, as a practice, it can, but I'm just saying.
Side, because that's not going to but.
No, the objective wasn't to canon.
Could be.
He did a lot of theoretical.
Could be.
He say in order to help the
you could say that
has to be to.
Okay. That's like put him inside.
It's much more important if a person out of say new.
I understand. I understand, right? So it's true that he's in a certain sense he's still on the side of Ian, right? He's not on the side of only being Allah Khamas, of course. Right, and also the Chazon Ish actually describes the experience, in other words, the practice of Ian HaTorah as the point of life. He really thinks that, right? And of course, like you're saying, he's maybe yesh la'ayin about this, but in a certain sense, all he's saying about Alib al-Halach is saying
about the getting guy in the Jankush.
Right, because he's not. In other words, he's not interested in the halacha as what Aristotle would call practical knowledge. Right. Practical wisdom. He's interested in theoretical wisdom. What he's saying is that your theoretical wisdom has to be about something. If you're not trying to figure out how to get to work halacha, then you're not learning anything. You're just making stuff up. That's maybe what he was saying. Yeah, but that's something very similar to what we could say over here, right? And I think that this confusion is actually something that causes the whole confusion, because you see, if you think that, let me try to work this out. Do you think that knowledge, that the work of learning is about finding out the truths, then both yeshivas and the Rama make no sense. And the ancient, right? And this is true for, you see. I'm not trying to do that. If it is the measure of things, halacha l'maaseh. Could I, like people say, like Rebbe Susalanta said, there's a very bad word attributed to Rebbe Susalanta where he told someone kibble, why do I care how many maluchim there are in the Himmel? Ich weiß, da größer stecken, und schluckt und something like that, right? And that's a very, you could call it a reductionist, materialist view of knowledge, right? Because the people will tell you, my focus is not on making you a Reshamayim. That's practical. That's maybe it's important, but it's not what I'm interested. I'm interested in knowing how many Malachim there are in the heaven. That's what I'm about, yes. And not even that, you see, even in the knowledge itself, I'm not interested in giving you the Maskuna. Giving you the Maskuna without giving you the debate and the way to get to it is not actually the experience, not actually the, I'm not trying not to say the word experience, not actually the practice of wisdom, because the practice of wisdom is what the Aristotelian was called demonstrative knowledge, right? Wisdom that actually understands how it's true, not only that it's true, right? Because that's what the practice of wisdom is. It's not having the right dogmas, and it's not doing the right things that Haruch Lamaas Hayotz Lunim is, right? So therefore, the guy that says, why would I care for all these proofs? I already believe there is a God, is totally missing the boat. Because that's not what it's about. It's just like the guy that says, why do I care about Masechtas Git? And I already know how to make a get. Look at Shachanor, right? But we're not about that. And the same thing, the guy that says, the same way the guy that says, you're just, what do you gain in your understanding from all of this? If you're not interested in, if you're not only trying to find the maskuna, is there or isn't there? Is also not, right? Not the guy that says there's no practical difference. Also the guy that says there's no theoretical difference is missing the boat. Right? Both of these things are true for E and Halacha as they are for philosophy in the Rambam's way. Right?
Was he last?
Again, you can't. Let's be clear. You can't reduce everything to practical knowledge. In other words, to knowing how to make a get or to knowing that there is a God. Right? Because that might be important, but it's not what wisdom is about. And you can't either reduce everything to practical or to the moichen midas shebe moich, they would say to the practical conclusion of things. In other words, give me the lamdis and that. Give me, like someone would come to yeshiva and tell me, just give me the lamdis and that, without all the back and forth. Just tell me a get is a whatever. I don't know what lamdis of a get is, right? A star is like this and it's like this. Just decide which one it is and tell it to me, and I'll remember it and shine. What would they tell him? I don't know if they would tell him, but theoretically what they should tell him is that's useless. Because you need to actually practice on the one hand the shtar is just the Gilida, second on the other hand it's I this, on the third hand it's this.
There's a lot of that going on, but there's still stuck on this.
On this?
There's just getting to the point,
but there's too much to just getting to the point.
So it's the ganze Masse Matten, so you skip those two plat and you say was a maskune, and then you can think, I would say a little different, and then you go. You
can do that if you want to write your own Kvaige. Okay, this is about the cheshbon and the svura. That's a shekel another nakida. I'm talking about the svura itself. You can't just think about which svura makes sense. That not even about that. You can't not even talk about that. You can't just. Why don't you lump on the side already what a migi is and to let us know when you're finished, and besides that, then you close the yeshiva because you already know what a migi is, right? That's leal ala das, right? Because we are going to forever discuss the student that is like this, and we're going to train people to do it. Why are we training all day? Why are we training? Exactly, because it's a practice, not a theoretical thing, right? Every bocha needs to know how to.
You're not becoming a lamdin by hearing all the maskunis, all the bottom lines.
You have to do it yourself, exactly. And there's a lot of criticism from the academic sense on the yeshivas that they're doing the same thing forever, and from this perspective, it totally misses the boat. It's if you look at wisdom, and I'm not saying that it's wrong, I'm just saying that from this perspective, it's totally missing the boat. Because the yeshiva is here to, yes, we're going to teach forever the same chakiras. Let's say, maybe people will get bored of it. But we theoretically could teach forever the same chakiras and train every bunch of bochrim to go through this and to do it themselves and write the same cipher 500 times, which is exactly what people did in philosophy for hundreds of years, exactly what the Rishonim did for hundreds of years in Allah. Nothing wrong with that. if you believe in knowledge as a point in itself. If you believe in knowledge, see, this is why I'm thinking it's weird, because you have to go into the knowledge itself. That's why I'm saying the second step, right? Not enough that you can't say the knowledge is only about making money, right? Even the humanities that theoretically believe in knowledge for itself don't believe in knowledge without being productive. I'll write a new paper. I don't have to write a new paper. I could rederive the old paper. You see, we like they took in geometry, right? Then Plato's Academy say you have to know how to prove the entire Euclides by yourself. But you're saying the same exact proof as him. You're not going to come up with new things. Maybe you will, but it's not about coming up with new things. It's not about adding to the knowledge, to the library. Because that's the two senses in which the yeshivas should agree with the Rambam, and that's important. And for some reason, I think that if I actually think that if Yeshivish people would do the Rambam's philosophy, they would do it and close it to the correct way. They just don't do it for random side reasons because they think you're in Makala Pekoides or something like that. But they basically have the same view of knowledge, of knowledge, of learning as the Rambam did.
I just think in every area they're very good because of this, because they're really trained to think.
They're also maybe good at textual analysis and stuff like that. I'm not saying, I'm just saying in this Nakida they actually agree. In other words, if a Yeshivish guy comes and tells you what is the point if you know there's a God, then he's being contradicting himself. But there's a reason for him saying this, which is that the people presenting the Rambam are generally the academic people, and to them there's like no point. And therefore it gets presented like this, and of course it's correct to say that there's no point in that. Does this make sense? Yeah. Now, what would the Rambam say? Now, here, this is where it becomes a little tricky, because there seems to be something in the Rambam which makes the academics right. Because what would the Rambam say about the Yeshivish people? He would say you are right that a hudam lenivra eila la'ayin b'miskulas. He would tell you are 100% right. But exactly, we're not interested. Exactly, and this is like people who laugh at the Rambam. I'm not saying that you go to Ganad for knowing math. You need to know math as a hakdome, because otherwise you know how to think and so on. But you need to. There's like a lot of bugs. Where are all these bugs coming from? Guy figured this out. But the carpet is schwitz is in of the floor. Wie they came from? Put one of these. Probably, maybe. We'll check. Find out. Okay. Was wohl der Rambam gesagt? Und der Rambam not wohl gesagt. Er hat es gesagt. He would tell you yes. But this is actually so interesting that what the Rambam would say about this. Because now I'm thinking about there's like a contradiction in his thing also. Because the Rambam would say, I'm not at all in the theory that you just presented. That's not true. See, this is where it becomes funny. I'm in the theory that knowing God, well, you could start it with saying knowing truth, and since God is the biggest truth or the most true and whatever in some way, that's the most knowledgeable thing really. So therefore that's the only knowledge that makes really sense and so on. But at the end of the day, I care about God. I don't care about making philosophy out of practical wisdom. That the Rambam would actually think, and he doesn't, not actually, he says this, he doesn't say it about Halacha, but he more or less think so. The Rambam would actually think, and this is something with the Rambam has a theory that looks something like this. This is very important to realize for this Nikida. People have different faculties, right? This is something that called faculty psychology. We're used to this because we have this lot of sfurim that work like this, different powers or different, right? There's a koyach hasaychel in a person like this, right, and so on. So he would say something like this: a person's mind is not one thing. There's a bunch of different chalukim, there's different faculties, right? And basically he would say something like this: you have sense perception, cheshim, okay, which and there's some cycle that corresponds to that, because not entirely sense. Sense means sense perception. Call it cycle mirgash or cycle mitma, something like that. And we have something called the imagination, dimion. This is more or less how, maybe I'm getting things wrong, but I think it's important to understand. If I'm getting things wrong, we'll fix it at some point. We have imagination. Imagination is basically, we have memory and imagination, basically. Imagination is basically the memory of sense perceptions. Now, so the difference between imagination and memory would be, memory is you can remember. In other words, I see you with my eyes open. That's where all knowledge starts, according to their way of thinking, by the way. I close my eyes, I still know about you. In other words, I remember how you look. Maybe the men we could nowadays we could think how is memory literally a picture or not. It's not important. I have the idea of you in my mind without actually seeing it. So that's what memory is very useful, because otherwise I would have to see the thing right away. Then I have another thing called imagination, which means that I could also, number one, maybe we could like divide like into like, I don't know exactly how they would think about like dry memories and picture memories and so on, but they would say that imagination also can do something bad in a certain sense, which is that I could also imagine things that I never saw, or I could combine things that I never saw into different. Like I could give like the example would always be a centaur, right? I always imagine a horse with a man's head, right? But that's nothing I ever saw, and therefore that's shaker. In that sense, imagination is a bad thing, because imagination is what allows you to have. He literally this demionis. People we see in our language, demionis is used a lot as a bad thing, but it all goes back to this idea. That demon is bad because you could imagine easily things that are impossible or nonsense. Okay, now these are the lower faculties. And then there's the highest faculty, which is called seichel itself. I forgot how they would call it exactly. The koicha seichel, the koicha sichli, or that one would call it tziras udam really. And seichel itself means the capability for abstract thinking. And it's always going to be an abstraction of these things. Because, for example, I see people and then I have a concept person or man. Sorry for the feminist, maybe we should say person. And that concept is not about, and this is, of course, gets to the question of universals, but you need universals for this to make sense. The concept is something, for example, the big thing what they would say was that an animal has everything until here, literally. They believe that animals have. And emotions, by the way, emotions don't exist. Emotions are basically imaginations. They don't have a concept of emotion. The Rambam doesn't really have a concept of emotion. Emotion is just imagination. Right? Because what is emotion? Emotion is that I can imagine that my son is being hurt, although I don't see him being hurt, or something like that. So it's just sense perception plus memory. Something like that. He doesn't have a thing called emotion, really. Okay. Now, it's not a basic part of his picture of the soul of the person. Imagination. It's emotions. It's imagination, he would say, and therefore it's everything that he says about imagination. It really means it includes what we would call emotions. And this is another thing that I'm probably not being precise about, but it's important to notice because we're very used to emotions being a real thing. At him, there's no such a thing. It's not a category of things. I'm trying to make this more sense now. And Seichel, this is the important part. We could call it conceptual thought. Conceptual thought, in other words, this is something that actually the Rambam thinks that most people don't have. I think Lomdim generally know what it is because they do a lot of that. In that sense, he's right, the guy that says that Lomdis is a good Akdamat. Right? Because there's like a din, what the Lomdim call a din. This red, no, the red guy. Anyway, the din, there's like a din, what we call a gader or a din, right? What it is to be a man. It's right, and in other words, according to Aristotle, it would mean the form of a man, literally. Because this is a good question. What is that, right? This is the one of the biggest first philosophical questions, or metaphysical questions. What do we mean by that, right? And people nowadays are very used to thinking a minimalistic way, a nominalistic way, by which we don't mean anything. We just mean a short way of saying all the people that I've met. But that's, of course, not true. So there's such a thing as person. And it's not you. It's something that I abstracted from meeting you and a bunch of other people. And I said, okay, there's something essential to being a person. We get the concept essence, and that is personhood. Now, in a certain sense, you and me have the same personhood. We only have different bodies, but we're both person. And in that sense, there's the same exact thing. This is where the Tanya gets this idea of Havas Yisrael being, okay, just to connect a bunch of things, right? That Havas Yisrael being Tzira and not Achayim, because this is where the idea starts. Right? There's only one Neshama, and the gift is the only thing that can make it matter. Is what can define things. Anyways, but of course it's a different thing. No, not a different thing. It literally comes out of the same thought. Okay, now, but the point is that, of course, the big machlokas if there's really only one Tzira Sudam or not, or a lot, but that's already real metaphysics. Anyways, what I'm saying now, back to the psychology over here, right? So the psychology is the picture of the person is that there's something called abstract reasoning. Abstract reasoning is but the power by which we apprehend universals, basically, or concepts. But concepts is the wrong way of thinking about it, because concepts means that it's in your mind. To him, it's in the world, right? So the way in which we apprehend universal, or another way of saying it, and the Aristotelian way of saying it, is the by which we apprehend forms, or the Platonic way. The only difference is where the forms are, but that's what a cycle is. Now, according to this, after you have this like three-part psychology, more or less, the Rambam would say something like this, that there is a moral. The Rambam, not the Rambam, the Aristotle, the Rambam would say that there is a moral, in other words, a virtuous way in which to use all these things. And the morality is basically based on the concept that a thing should do what it is for, or what it is misyacheded, what it is individuated by, and not what it's not. For example, this is the example I have to think of. This example in the lower powers also. But the big example would be, the example, he would have an example. The Rambam talks about Rira Vayra Kushma Vayra in this sense, right? One of Rira Vayra Kushma Vayra, this is one of the Rambam's big stories. But a slower example would be something like this, that is a koich. It sort of matches the same thing, but I would say it in a simpler way, so we could start from a simpler way, right? A person and an animal, and this is how the logic of the Aristotle's whole ethics more or less runs on this logic. Person and animal, we could check. That's where we get the idea of animalistic things, right? Nefesh HaBahamis. Nefesh HaBahamis is literally copy-paste Aristotle. It's amazing how people think that he took it from the Atz Chaim, you see. The word Nefesh HaBahamis is literally copy-paste from Aristotle on this. It's just, okay, this is just to get people out of their idea that there's revelation in Kabbalah. Anyways, Nefesh HaBahamis is literally an animal soul. So and that is, he made up this word. And he means literally the same thing when they talk about it in Kabbalah. They don't mean something different. Right, okay. What did I want to say? As his nefesh is, by the way. Okay, now, a mushal, a very simple mushal to how this logic would work would be something like this. The Rambam says this about Shira Agufim in Moira somewhere. Animal, we look at a person and an animal, right? And we both do a bunch of things similarly, not similarly, the same, right? There's a power, he calls it the nefesh tzemachas, right? There's a person and an animal, actually plants do the same also, in that sense we're just like plants. In biological, modern biological terms, we say that we both have cells that split and multiply and so on. So in that sense, not just an animal, just a vegetable. An animal does a few things that vegetables don't do, which is mostly that it can move around. And that's what we call nefesh HaBahamis, whatever power lets the animal move around. But it actually also has something corresponding to that in its mind, right? It must have some sort of imagination, because animals also have memory and they also care about their children and so on. So this is how they know that animals have imagination, right? They could have what we call emotions. Very important to remember that Aristotle didn't think like Descartes that animals don't have emotions. They thought that animals have emotions, or in other words, they have imagination. Therefore, in this sense, I don't know if this would be an example for this. Now, another thing. Therefore, when a person, this would be something. When you are doing something, you're having an achmanis on your child. When you're caring for your children, you're not doing something human. You're doing something animalistic, because you're also an animal. People are animals plus humans, but they are also animals. So there's nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing special about it. Your chaylik abahami, you has to do that. Your chaylik atimin has to do that, but it's not. Now, there are some things that are specifically human. And in other words, whenever you're procreating and eating, all of those things are things that animals also do, which doesn't necessarily make them bad in themselves. It's important to realize they don't think that animals are bad. People get confused about this also. Think that Aristotle, the Rama thinks that Yeshivish is bad. You see, it doesn't mean bad. It's not bad. Only saying that we and animals have the same one. There is, well, again, we could talk metaphysically, it's literally the same one. But the same thing that they do, we eat and have sex, and they eat and have sex, and therefore there's nothing special about it. Now, a person has something, let's talk about speech, for example, but really we have to get about aspects of it. It's easier to talk about speech. We have a capability to communicate, at least on a better level than animals do. And again, we have to get into exactly what that means, because even the ancients didn't think that animals don't communicate at all. Obviously, they do communicate. Right, but they don't have words, so they don't have symbolic communication. We have to get into what that exactly means. Basically, means the same thing. Ends up meaning when they say udam medaber and udam basach, ends up meaning the same thing. Ends up meaning that they don't use words. In other words, they don't have abstract concepts, because that's basically what a word is. So don't have universal. So the difference between a human rachmunis, for example, if this thing is human rachmunis, would be that we could care about the concept man, or the mean a man. No cow cares about the cow kind. Humans care about humankind. Could care. Most of us don't. In that sense, we're just having animal morality, which is good. But human morality would be to care about humankind. And therefore, the Rambam would say, now the moral is that each power, if it's a higher power, now the interesting thing about higher powers is that they sometimes, this is something that, a very interesting point, because he talked about natural law, and there's something more than natural in this, but I think that to them there's something very reasonable about this I have to think about more. Because they would say that there's something interesting where higher powers can be mishpal, where they can be lower than used for lower powers. For example, this is the prime example that Rambam gives, and I think he got it from Plato actually, which is that humans and animals both have sex drives, and humans have something special that animals don't have, which is called speech. Now, if a human writes a poem about a sex drive, he's making the human into an animal. That's a bad thing. That's the worst thing you could do. Because animal beside it, no problem. Be an animal. You have to. I'm not saying you shouldn't. You have to. So you have to. There's a mitzvah even and so on. But if you're gonna make into an idea, then you're ruining it. That's how he looks at it. Because ideas, and this is how his whole metaphysical ethics looks. Ideas have a correct place, and again, I'm missing something in the reason why this has to be so. And I think there's a better explanation of this. Abstract thoughts should be about abstract things. It should not be about practical things. Because the base animals do quite well with their sex without having thoughts. So why would you have thoughts? So you have the ability to express abstract thoughts and to think abstract thoughts, so that you can grasp universals, so that you can grasp the forms. You don't have it so that you should have better sex. He doesn't see that as a value at all. You could make an argument for cat.
Well, what if I use my brains, to find the shit?
Right, he doesn't believe in that. No. Well, of course. See, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. This is why. No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I noticed this problem. We have to look it up. There's a reason. There's a teretz. There must be a teretz for this kasha. It's too simple. Of course, you could say what I mean. The whole point. But there's the real difference. We have to get this. We are probably not used to this theory, because of course there's a different theory that would say no, a person should do the animal things like I mentioned. I don't think he believes that that's really possible. Of course, maybe you would agree that you should. At least, but it's not really possible. No, he doesn't really believe. This is very important. The Rambam really doesn't believe that it's possible to hapach the chaymer letzira. That's nonsense to him. This language, see the Shvurim use this language. La chaymer letzira. The Rambam would look at you like it's like being hapach 3-2. What are you even saying? What does this even mean? Of course, what could you do? Maybe he would, even use the same language. What could you do? You could use your koyach hatzira for tzira, not be mahapach the tzira l'choymer. You see, you can do that. You can do mahapach tzira l'choymer somehow by focusing on practical wisdom only, which the Rambam calls chetetz adas, right? This is the chetetz adas, that you use your cycle to get sex. That's the worst thing. What should you use to get sex? Whatever the animals do, I don't know. Like you're saying, it sounds a little weird when I'm saying like this, but you shouldn't focus it on that. Most of your koyach cycle, of course. This is the problem. This is what the Rid Sanashom Lagif is in this whole view, right? This is where we get into the tragedy of Rid Sanashom Lagif, which is that humans must. There's not really a good way. But what I'm saying is that what's impossible is that the Choyme stays Choyme by definition, because it's a metaphysical thing. You can't make Choyme into Tzira. Why would you even want to do that? It's not even a bad thing that people have animal parts. Maybe in a certain sense it is bad, because if you think of the cycle as separable, it could exist without it. So why is it here? That's the question of why called the tragedy of human soul being in a body. But he doesn't really have a good answer for that in a certain sense. That's what other people would criticize him and say, okay, so according to you, that's the whole thing of being in a body is a mistake. But really his theory is like this, and he would say, we can get let's leave this on the side. The basic idea of his ethics is that the higher parts should not be made slaves to the lower parts. And this because it's bad, it's against the natural order of things, clearly, and it's like nezem zov b'afchaz. It's like using a gold spoon to brush your. Of course you could, otherwise if you wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't be a spoon. But a gold spoon is made to strip gold with, not made to clean the garbage with. In the same sense, if you use cycle again, the prime example, the easier example, if you use cycle to get sex, then you're doing the worst thing possible. That's what Rambam thinks. The Rambam says that, in this sense, see, this is something funny, because it's, of course, this is opposite of what we think, and when we learned that parak, when it's sometimes barichas, it seems the Rambam would say that romance is worse than lust, because romance is humanifying, is prettifying the animal urge. We have this Victorian idea. Some of us have this idea that, at least mach es romantisch, light some candle, whatever. Like, if you write a poem, then you're at least a mensch about it. If you're stam, of course, there's not a crazy thing to think. You could say like the Gemara was sari or the was you have to be mefayis and so on. There's a reason to think that it's wrong. This, but the Rambam, at a certain point, says that this is wrong, because then you're just you bring mashbal the koich hasichlit by using it for this. And like, it's far. We have to think if he really thinks that is it better to do it like an animal. I don't know. Probably not. But it's better not to do it at all. You see, not better. In a certain sense, it's better, because what defines a human is his humanness, is his human part, which is an abstract cycle. And therefore, ideally, that's what it said. This is where you get to the separability.
In a way, it's okay. Like you use your cycle, like I was saying before, like. Okay, you're using a cycle to be mind
to be
mind.
No, not to be
not to take the Eish that does. You find
you could say
you're
that.
Just like you're narrowing it down.
So then what you're really doing.
So you're more.
Okay, maybe he would say that what you're really doing.
Less animalistic about it. So
you're less animalistic, not about it. You see, people think that when the Ram says Yeshivish, so this is what Chedpa just means that unfortunately we have this God, literally godly part, which is abstract thought, which is literally God. Basically, God is that in a certain sense, and we're the same. It's nefshilikis basically, and it's not. And when we're alive, it's not separable from everything else we do. So God is going to the bathroom. Well, that's what we say Hashem Yutza, by the way. To apologize for that, right? That's Yutza's apology, bro. And nobody realizes this. Good if you the weißt, dass well, that's what it says. It's an apology, bro. No, apology for being human. How do I get to this? Yeah, of course. So, and he literally sees this as a tragedy. Therefore, if you're smart, you're going to be at least try to mimat. In other words, what you're going to try to is keep the gold part for the gold. Of course, there's no way to entirely keep it, and maybe the best thing is to minimize it and so on. But he doesn't think that it's bad. The garbage is needed. This garbage, the animal part is needed. He doesn't think that it's evil. He doesn't say that you should go misrach because it's evil. It's just not what humans are for. And in this sense, so this is how his whole thing looks, and that's why, to him, it's very important. This is really the explanation in the end of why this is the tachlis of a person, because a person was endowed with this abstract reasoning faculty, and the only real thing for that to do is to apprehend God. Of course, it could learn Choshen Mishpat. But that would be literally doing the same mistake as the Romance people. This is really what the Rambam thinks. You have to get it. It's very radical if you think that you used to think that Choshen Mishpat is very high, holy. But the Rambam more or less thinks, I wonder, maybe I'm wrong here. He more or less thinks, he says this about Chet HaSadat. Chet HaSadat is learning Choshen Mishpat instead of Kabbalah. It says with Elish and Peirik Aleph, Peirik Bayis, whatever. Because, and this needs to be explained better, because the end goal to him, and you could be chaylik on this, but to him the end goal of all of law, right, of all of what the Yunim do, what the rabbis do, basically, in their capacity as lawyers and judges, is to make this world work. In other words, the animal world, more or less. And so it's worthless. And if you use your abstract faculties to make that, maybe again there might be no way out of it, right? The Ram also has to do lamdas because he needs to know the halacha, it needs to be just and so on. But that's actually a huge surah. That's actually part of the same tragedy. It's maybe even a better description of the tragedy of the neshama being in a body. Right? Because now this is something that we have to think about, but we have to find out also why exactly does he think that God is more abstract. Of course he thinks, of course it's true, but how does this work? That God is more abstract than Lamdus. This is an important point to realize. In other words, just like there's in the person, there's these levels. There are these levels in the world, which more or less correspond, right? So your sense perception faculties, touch, they're masik, right? That's the language. The sensual part of the world, in other words, the lowest world. Your imagination sort of touches we could call the emotional part of the world, but it's not exactly. It might be just make good use of the sensual part of the world, and your mind. In other words, your own form touches the forms, and in a certain sense, this is where we get to the whole idea of seichel, maskal, miskal. It's the same thing. That's another thing that we have to really get clear for this to make any sense. And now, since of course there are now in that world, there's also levels, basically, right? There are the forms of things, like Aristotle would teach. The forms of things will fit in the part of your mind that are is the form of your body. And there is God, which is, sort of beyond that. But still intelligible. It's very important for God to be intelligible, because otherwise it doesn't make sense, this whole system. And God is the most intelligible thing. In other words, the most abstractly intelligible thing, because he's not a body at all. So he has no, basically he has no matter, or in other words, he has no potential. Different ways of saying it. So God is the only thing that's purely, maybe in a total way, we have to think about the sichlim that are between us and God. In what sense do they have any matter? This is a big machlokes in the philosophical world. If there's total holomorphism, if the Galgalim have matter and form, or the only form, and so on, or the Malachim, and so on. But the Rambam, I don't know exactly what he thinks about this. But at least in a certain sense, God is the only thing that's entirely form without any matter. And you could say it like this. It's probably not the precise way of saying it, because the whole form-matter distinction stops for making sense. But in a certain sense, God is the most abstract thing to know by definition, because he's not a body. This is where we get to this whole thing. And therefore, since your mind as a human is actually for that, in other words, your power to get really abstract things, the only thing, and of course the only thing it's really for is for God. So this has to do with the whole teleology, right? Everything has a purpose, right? The purpose of your mind is not to have sex. Obviously not, because you could have perfectly good sex without that. So it's not for that, although it might be useful to it. It's not for that, right? But the purpose of your mind, and it's also the purpose of your mind in the most abstract level, is to know God. That's the only purpose it has. It's created for that. And therefore, if you don't do that, you're nowhere. And therefore, if you use that faculty to understand lower things than that, you're misusing it for its purpose. It's like using I have to go more graphic. It's like using a human being as a map, right? A human could be a good map. Let's tie him to a stick and put his clothing into the thing. That's what he really. I have to use this. You have to get a more graphic example to get how nuts it is to the Rambam, right? Because they're like using a cat as a map. Just as crazy, right? Cat is not being for being a map. Something wrong with that, right? What's wrong? A cat, so it's a map. So in this, let's try to circle back to where we are, right? This was all Hakdama, very important Hakdama for everything to make sense, right? Now we have to try to circle back to where we are. Where are we? We're trying to explain. In other words, let's try to answer the question of why the Rambam doesn't make sense to us anymore. So which part of this? This gives a lot of material of where we don't like it, where people don't like it. I like it. So where people don't like it.
What?
No, which part don't we like? Of this whole story, which part doesn't make sense?
I don't know. Maybe we just became more animalistic. Like it gets very boring when we start talking about feminine and all the.
I don't even think that's true, because you see that Lamdim at least managed to be more curious about Sira than about Chaim. They don't realize how holy they are by themselves. Because, and there's something weird here. Okay, tell me, because they somehow limit themselves to the Tzira of very embodied things.
I don't think
I don't even know why. I know why. The Tanya talks about why, because they sort of think that this is the only thing we can really understand. So there's a few things that happen to cause this problem. I don't know which one is the most important. Of course, Nachamol, the stuff that we're animalistic, that the Rambam would say. That's easy. Of course, everyone is animalistic. You need to be special to not be animalistic.
Right.
This
You're
is
right. Well, London's target. People are very interested in London. I mean, and understanding people.
We sort of got into this whole thing to describe the difference between, assuming that again, most people are not yeshivish. In other words, most people don't care about lamdis. Even in yeshiva, by the way, a lot of the cast of like Bali Halucha against lamdis is really this. It's really hatred for the spiritual. And you're not allowed to say this, but it's true. It's really like this, like, tell me what to do. Why dry me a cup? Then in that sense, I'm very much on the Lamdam side here. Rabbi Soloveitchik tries to describe things in these terms. I'm not the first one to do this. So of course that now we try what we try to do is something different, right? We try to do is say why the Yeshivish people don't understand the Rambam, right? Because assuming that this is a important thing, of course most people don't care about thought at all.
More like I think the other likes like more the sports Shabbat, like the lot of the shred and you for emphasis. It's more. No,
we could do sport on this. There's a lot of sport. What do you mean?
I know Reb Nachman Batzel talks about. Says that so you do in alle philosophen you do as am geschrieben am chef.
That just kid didn't read the right philosophers. Of course, there's not like that. I don't think that's true. No, I don't think it's true that there's not amkes like them and am chef. I don't think that's true.
There is a certain geschmack in the Teusches that you don't find in the
No, you don't find in what? Give me the book that we don't find it in. Because Plato is literally Teusfes. I mean, not exactly, but they do the same thing. I don't think that's true. I think that there's something different.
No, you're right. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so of course.
I did is there is not talking about yes.
No, there it is. No, I think
it could be very captivating.
Yeah, of course. No, I don't think it. I don't know what Menachem means in that. We'll think about it another time. I don't, or if it means anything. I don't think it's true that there's not. At least not the real. Of course. No, I don't think that's true. I think to walk. Of course, there's the first reason that the yeshivas have a lot of dogma problems. But if you think about it, dogma is just another version of saying I don't care about the thought. I only care about hayot slunim yizeh. This is what, at least in my presentation. Of course, they wouldn't say like this. I'm just saying this. So it's not a kash on them. Right? When you say, why do I care how to know if there's a God? I only care that there is because it says in the Animamen. Then you're saying the same thing as the guy that says, I don't care why the kidney works, I just care if it works.
Right.
You're just being mad in the whole concept of intellect. Right. But of course, they don't think about it like this. They think of a minute as like a mitzvah, not as a thought at all. So besides, so this is a one practical reason why they don't do it. Okay, beside that's easy. For that we don't even see that part. We don't even not interested in. Right, social, almost social. It's not like no. It's not. It's exactly. It's not only social. It's almost social. But what I want to get is to actually a thought over here. I think that there's a thought here also, and the Yeshivish people are not they're not the ones to express this, but I think the Baal Tanya expresses this very much when he talks about the mala of nigla over nista, and it's something that I think is very, very wrong. You see, the Baal Tanya says something like this, which is a very good example of something that Rambam would never agree to from every aspect. And again, try just to understand the Maika Miflagi is probably enough for us to do today. Baal Tanya says, "Why is nigla better than nista?" Remember this Torah, right? To him, Torah is Chachmas Hashem. Okay, besides everything is Chachmas Hashem. I don't know why Torah is special, but and now there's a mala of Torah over mitzvahs, and also the same mala of Nigla over Nister in this, because what Tanya says, when we learn Shar Shenag Chasapura, we know pretty well what a Shar is and what a Pura is, so we have something he calls the Dias Samahis. when we learn it's Chaim, we have no idea what Zayin, what Nuk is. So therefore, we have only something he calls Idiyas HaMetzias. And therefore, yeah, it says many times. And therefore, it says over here in the Vayikru in the beginning, and it says in Tanya and again Kinderzeichen somewhere, and the somewhere. Yeah, it says a few times. And therefore, since intellect, since my whole idea of intellectual dvaik, which is the Rambam's idea, since there's a certain, he calls there a certain yichud. Okay, this is something, another thing we have to take apart, make a note about what Seichel Maskal really means, and why it's not so exciting as the Tanya thinks it is, or more exciting, but just makes a lot more sense than he makes it sound like. But in general, that he's working with his thought, right? He literally quotes it, and then working with this thought, he claims something very contrary to what the thought would actually claim, that therefore Nigla is a better candidate for this thing than Nista. Since Nista is about things that we do not really know. So now, I think that something like this is actually going on, I think is behind a lot of, not only him, but a lot of yeshiva, you could say yeshivish, aversion to doing theology. Because the yeshivish think, okay, we know more or less what Nush Mazikin is about. We don't know what Etzchaim is about at all. We don't know. I mean, it's about God, but who knows anything about God?
Right.
So therefore, they would say, if you're after the intellectual unification, right, the intellectualist actus with God, the only way to do it is through the practical Torah, not through the theoretical Torah. Do you know this? Do you know that you never saw this Torah? You have to look.
Yeah, I mean,
no.
I think he has a
this is one of his pshetlach, okay?
Yeah, okay.
One of his.
Yeah.
He has other pshetlach, but this is one of his pshetlach. This is one of his pshetlach. Now, this pshetl shows. Now, exactly. Now, to me, this pshetl shows that you didn't understand anything that I just told you. I have to try to take it apart clearly. But this shows that you got the whole story wrong. Why does it show that you got the whole story wrong? Now, for both top and bottom reasons. Number one, the Rambam does not believe that God is unknowable in his essence. It's not true. The Rambam says things like this, and it doesn't mean that. And whoever read it like this make a huge mistake, and this source of a lot of other mistakes. It has to do with this. I'm going to say this, and this has to do with number 3, right? And it's very important to me. People think that they're elevating God by saying that he's not intelligible, and they just make him irrelevant, or at least ruin this whole system of being able to worship God by knowing him. It's not true. But I definitely think that you could know God, and he definitely says that the only real thing that the cycle is for is that. How can you tell me that God is unknowable, and then therefore what? Again, this whole theory of God being unknowable just leads to materialism. In other words, just needs the only thing we can know, therefore our creation, therefore the only thing we should do is halacha. This is Chetz again, in the Rambam's version. Right? So that's number 1. I can tackle it from the top. I don't know where he got this idea that Bechlal, God's essence, is unknowable. It's not true. I know we can think of what the Rambam means when he says things that sound like that, but they don't mean this. Because if they would be unknowable, then this taka would make no sense. And obviously it does make sense because he says differently, right? Even the Tanya actually says differently, but then the Tanya has to invent new faculties for this to work for him. So he invents. Yeah, but Tanya believes also we have a Diyas HaMehis, but he invents something called Minipshita or whatever to make up for this. A lot of this is connected to the same sigya. See, the Tanya does want you to know God, but he claims that it's impossible by intellect, and then says, therefore, I'm going to invent something called a Minipshita, which knows God, and just magic. And therefore, he might as well just do mitzvahs, because again, we end up in a very sort of collapsing the whole theology. And this is a very bad thing that happens, in my view. The Rambam would never agree with anything like this. And I think even the Tanya is just being very confused about his metaphysics and his philosophy, and that's why he's saying it. He doesn't even think that really like that. Because it's just the opposite. When you say, firstly, let's go back to this. Let's go back to this whole psychology picture that we have, right? When you say we know what Shoshan is about, and we don't know what God is about. Firstly, you didn't understand what's going on with Shoshan Chasapura. Why? Because when we talk about the halacha of Shoshan Chasapura, as opposed to when we're actually buying the shar and the pura, right? We're not talking about the shar. We're talking about the nefesh of the shar, the tzira of the shar, what the Rambam would call it, the form of the shar, right?
The not so much a shor, it's about the shor.
Let's say the halacha. Let's say if you're doing halacha, you're talking about the halacha of the kinyan. If you're doing natural philosophy, in other words, if you're doing science, then you're talking about the shor itself. Whatever. But that's still the same thing, right? Really, because of course the Tanya really has. There's the real question on the Tanya is that, and of course, people in his generation are literally saying this. That the only thing we could know is the natural world, so therefore we should do only natural philosophy and not metaphysics. The Tanya says the same thing. Just instead of natural philosophy, he says halacha. But in structure, they're the same thing. And why he thinks that halacha is better than knowing the shor itself, I don't know. It doesn't really give a reason for that. That's just magic. That's just a minute pshita. Because of course, God created the world with wisdom, and if there's a part of his wisdom that we can actually grasp, right? This is what this whole theory is saying, right? There's a part of God's wisdom which is about himself, okay? We don't understand. There's part that are, so that's science.
He talks about this.
He never answers this.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it doesn't answer this question why he thinks that Torah is holier, is more knowing God than science. I don't know that he answers this question. He says that there's Gimel Klip Satmais, all kinds of nonsense things. I'm sorry to say. Why is it Gimel Klip Satmais? What does it even mean that for knowledge to be a klippa? It doesn't make any sense. Your knowledge is either true or not. It doesn't. It doesn't Tanya Barik, whatever. What? What does this mean? What is the theory behind this? Okay. I think this is part of the whole thing, but basically he just saying that God, the only thing of let's become. I don't think it means anything. No, it doesn't say anything like it's not. Because it's Bittul Torah. I know what Bittul Torah is. And besides, what the things that we're learning were false, so of course. Okay. No.
I think it's because of that.
No, but it's not a riot. He's saying it's Bittul Torah. Bittul Torah. I know chemistry, but it's Bittul Torah. Alchemy means chemistry. It wasn't alchemy really. But no, alchemy is just Arabic for chemistry.
Yeah.
But of course, in those times, alchemy and chemistry were the same thing. So, yeah, but it's not nishkanach minute. What I'm saying is that it's a Bittul Torah. I understand the Tana of Bittul Torah. If I can't. Okay, I'm not getting into this. I'm just saying that let's just get back to the Nekida that I am at. And it could be study saying the same thing, that we cannot know God abstractly, we can only know Him. But the problem is that it's not true. Because the things that we're interested in Shashanog Chasapura, if you're a Ram, even if you're a Lamdan at least, I don't know if the Tanya is thinking of Lamdas here, I'm not sure what he's actually thinking about. Because like you're saying, the fact that we...
then is also Lamdas.
So exactly, so then what is he even saying that we know what a shor is? Who cares about the shor? We're not learning about the shor. We're learning about what happens what happens to the shor when he has a baby, and what's it got to do with this baby? Nothing to do with. No, let's say we do know the essence of a shor, we don't know the essence of the halacha. It's an abstract thing by definition. What does it even mean to know it? No, you could say you're more familiar. You could say no. Again, I'm saying what I'm trying to say is that Tanya doesn't get. No, wait 1 second. What I'm trying to say is that the Tanya, when in this description, doesn't get the concept of universal of a shor even. He's so low. You could say something much simpler, which probably people would say. We know we're familiar with shors, so therefore it's easy for us to talk about shors side. That's not interesting. So get familiar with Hatzilus, man. You talk about 5 times until it becomes comfortable to you. What was the point? You're trying to make an argument. It's trying to say we know what a shor is, but we don't know what a zai is. Now I want to tell him that you don't know what a shor is either. Because if you're talking about the matter, the material of the shor, that's not interesting. That's meat and cells and whatever it's made out of, atoms. There's no way we can understand that.
And the story never happened.
Right.
It
might have happened. Right, because he's...
I say he's very busy with that.
Right. Right, so yeah, but that's not a k'tina. Because he's just trying to... No, because over there he's actually on the right side. Over there is on the right side. Because there is just saying, the halacha is not only about knowing halacha lama. So this is a big kiddush. Again, the loika Rambam.
No, but I'm just saying, but either way... But it's kept to the idea of it.
Right, but he doesn't seem to realize that. He doesn't seem to realize that.
Because there's no shor here. There's no shor.
Right. He doesn't. I don't think he thinks he needs to get to the idea of the shor, because he would say, "I'm getting to the cycle of God, which decided." This is what he says.
But we're talking about it.
Yeah, but he doesn't seem to realize that halacha is in itself a form kind of thing. Because all he says when he says that the halacha doesn't have to happen is of course to try to disprove that what other people would say, that halacha is only about knowing what to do. In other words, making the world make sense. He says, no, halacha is about knowing what God, because this has to do with his whole weird theory of what mitzvahs bichlal are, because it doesn't even time mitzvahs. See, everything goes back to the same, always goes back to the same problems. But what he's really saying is that halacha is about knowing what God told us or thinks about this case. Right? In that sense, it's not. But since I know what this case would be if it would exist, it's not abstract to him. Right.
Okay.
So he doesn't need. It's holy in the sense that it's about God's knowledge or God's wisdom or God's rutzen, but it's not about. It's not about the shot at all.
Right.
He doesn't need the shot to be abstract at all. The shot is a material shot. The shot is a concrete shot.
Okay.
So I don't think he even realizes that the halacha is actually not concrete. In other words, that a shot is not concrete. The concept of a shot is not a thing. The concept of a shot, philosophically, is like a universal.
No.
It's not. He doesn't start talking. He doesn't.
He's saying.
I'm saying, yeah, I understand. I'm saying Yera'uda doesn't need to lead necessarily to the concept of the universal shot.
Okay.
You understand? Because it's just saying, there will be a shot. It's just saying that it's not about halacha, it's about God's will. It's just a way for him to illustrate that. I don't even think he might even tell himself that, of course, halacha l'masa is more important. You see, he doesn't really think that.
Okay.
It's koidim. Of course, whatever. I'm not getting into the Tanya's theory of Talmud Torah over there because it doesn't make any sense to me. But, anyways. Now, back to where I am, this is what I'm saying. Now, this theory, that the Tanya, I think Tanya is a good example. I think that people would tell you something similar, and maybe the Nefesh Chaim would say, I don't know, the Yeshiva would say something similar. We already noticed that it has to do again with the theory of what mitzvahs are b'chlal, because he seems to think that mitzvahs are arbitrary commands, and therefore they're not really about anything. But not forget about that problem. The shard that he's talking about is not more knowledgeable than God. He doesn't seem to realize this. It's only more familiar, but I don't think it's more intelligible. For the halacha to be intelligible, you already have to have abstract reasoning. And once you have actually abstract reasoning, I do not know why people keep on saying that God is unintelligible. This is a very important point to me. If you read Chassidus, even the Tanya keeps on saying things that make no sense in this area. He keeps on, in the Rambam's view, he keeps on confusing imagination, dimyan, imagination, and seichel. He keeps on assuming that the only thing we can know is things that we can imagine. He doesn't believe in knowledge at all. And of course, there's modern philosophers that are on his side. Right, again, he sort of seems to be working in the framework, which is a modern framework which doesn't actually believe in knowledge. But for example, when you say, you go to, for example, let's take a basic example like this, right? People would say God is not knowable. Why is God not knowable? Because he doesn't have a body, for example, right? You only know bodies. That's nonsense. That's true of your imagination. The Rambam will tell you this is true of your imagination, but it's not true of your cycle. We understand math, abstract math. We understand lumdis. Now keep on going back to lumdis. We understand it perfectly well. There's nothing missing in our understanding of lumdis. We understand the concept that yes, there's a yoima. There's also a din yoima. The din yoima is not. We understand what this means. And that, by the way, not everyone understands. I actually think that many people do not understand. Even some people that are learning lumdis have no idea. Don't understand that. But it's not I think that a lot in most Bochram Yeshivish Tana have no idea what we're talking to them. I won't tell them lumdis, including me when I was in Yeshivish Tana. I had no idea what they wanted to. My time was much better spent learning Bikiyas. But when you're 25, if you're smart enough, you should figure out what it means. It's not irrational concept. It's totally rational. Not at least totally rational. This is the only thing that's rational. This is what intelligence means. And for some reason, the Tanya keeps on saying things like this. So Yov Kalam is not understandable. What? And then he goes on to explain it. What do you mean it's not understandable? Nothing wrong with understand. I understand the Tanya Chabad. The Nochema asked discussion on the Rav Shach's version of it, on the Viskedus version of it. I read. And the same question, but he's so funny.
What do you mean? But
no.
Aristotle understood this.
So Rabbi Greenwald writes
the idea of
the Malm Nadas is hard to understand.
Is a very understandable idea. I mean,
exactly, it's perfectly understandable. Not only is it perfectly understandable, it's more understandable than limited understandings. Because Chomer is actually hard to understand.
It doesn't have that
because it's not intelligible. No, because it's not intelligible. How do you work with the concept? It's very messy. The forms are actually intelligible. That's where the only intelligible things. This is the whole theory of forms. Everyone agrees with this. Even if you say there's no forms, they say, okay, well, I'm talking about concepts in our mind.
I think the world is perfectly square, but
exactly. Exactly. But now you could also always be a nominalist and say there's no perfect squares in any Platonic realm. We're just talking about concepts in our mind. Besides this, even that is more intelligible than the squares, the actual squares. That's another machlokes. But if you're how realist you would be about it, but. That's why I don't understand. He asked this question on Rav Shach, and he tries to think that the Tanya's version doesn't have this problem. I didn't understand the difference. But of course,
I also saw more the Kasha. I asked more than the Aviyaz.
You saw his article in the Cipher Around. There's a whole man about this.
It's talking about. I tried to make sense of it.
No, now I'm making sense of it. It makes sense for people that don't have a concept of cycle. They only have Dimion. And it's true that Dimion does not understand infinity. You cannot imagine it. It's at least hard to imagine. Maybe you could imagine it, but it's very hard to imagine it. Or you cannot imagine anything that's not a body. Like this, the Rambam will tell you this.
That's what he says.
Right.
Yeah, we could talk about Mal.
It makes total sense. It even works, right?
Yeah,
you just tell it to me.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, I know Aristotle knew it.
Not only Aristotle, we know it. The Rebbeinu Shalom, like Chaznish says in
where you
math is Lamalam Mukim Mizman. No, the Rebbeinu Shalom.
Right. The Chaznish, the famous Chaznish.
Math is everything. It's not even hard. It's not even very complicated.
Right.
But again, the answer to this question in the Rambam's version, I don't know how true it is because maybe we could imagine.
I think the Rambam when Baltanya says Soiviv, all he says is that we can't prove it from the world. I mean, it's not the.
That's another question. Could you prove it? I don't know. Maybe you could. Maybe you can't.
Means.
I don't know if that's true.
No, the Tzemach Tzedek and Tzemach Akira, Takafrek to the Rambam, we could prove it from the world. Even Soiviv. I have a Mahalach, we could prove it from the world.
Right.
So he's yeah.
So then it's Choylek on his side.
A bit, yeah.
Also the. I remember exactly.
Because why should everything work together? What the eye of Soiviv also.
No, what do you mean? The Rambam proved Soiviv. These people are so funny because they make up their own definitions for everything and then they wonder why nobody says it.
He says a different type of Soiviv. No, because that's...
He doesn't. Okay, I'm not getting into this.
Aristotle had also Soiviv, but it's more... But Soiviv...
I'm not getting into this. I'm not getting into this. Of course, these things... I don't know. When you actually figure out how the medieval system works, it makes sense. I think that these people are just very confused. Okay, let's try to get back where we are. No, I'm just saying, in Chabad they reinvent everything.
Aristotle said
that what?
The Maaseh, if you hold Kadmis, that it's the world rules as Chayev
and therefore
that's not really Soiviv. So it's kind of like
it's not even clear to me.
This to do the Soiviv in the
why do we have to use these weird? See, these Meshulim are what hurts them because these Meshulim are all Dimion Meshulim. This is one of the big problems with. See, it could be that Kabbalah disagrees with the Rambam. We'll have to get to this. But this is the very big difference. At least, no, I know. Remember, I don't remember. It's very hard. Look, yeah, I understand. I understand. Okay, let's get back. Let's get back to where we were. No, but it's very hard. It's very hard for me because these people are totally confused. I can't. They're totally confused. Not totally confused. They just made up. They used new concepts. They don't understand the old ones. My great example is Mechiv HaMetzias. When you'll find me one book, one Achron that understands what it literally means, then I'll start taking him seriously philosophically. Okay, they all just have crazy pshutim. What is it? They don't even know what it means. It's funny. What should I tell him? Even the Tanya doesn't seem to know what it means. He thinks that it means that it's necessary from the Metzias. The Chadramak, when you come take from the Ramak, find me a place where it explains the difference between a contingent existent and a necessary existent, and explains that that's what the Rambam means in Mechiv HaMetzias. Then we'll talk further. Because meanwhile, I don't know anyone that explains it like this. I mean, I know that that's the Rambam. What it means. It's so obvious and simple if you know a little bit of the context, but they don't. No. Yeah, because Mechiv HaMetzias. Okay, I'm not getting into all these. This is like stam politics. This is just fights. No, I'm just saying it's hard for me to read those things because they're so messed up. Let's no, but now who? I know. I know, but it's not true. You know what? It's not true. It's just confused concepts. That's all it is. Sorry, the older concepts make sense. They just make. You can't come and make stuff up and say, "Oh, of course, you just make stuff up." They're just using things that make no sense. Anyways, of course, the problem that you borrow concepts and you don't understand them, you pretend to ask questions, and then you make up your own homegrown system that doesn't really make sense. That has these huge holes, and there's actually a system in which using the same concept more or less made sense. So why would we need to go to this funny system that makes no sense? And the idea that makes no sense, that they keep on saying that this is Lamal Nadas. Lamal Nadas just means I'm not smart enough to figure out how to make sense of this. That's what it means to me. Because it's not so hard to make sense of most of the things that they claim to be Lamal Nadas. For example, this. But let's get back to I'm just fighting now. There's no use in this. What I'm getting, no, serious, it doesn't help. What the point really here is that they don't have this differentiation between Dimion and Seichel. It's very important to realize this. And we can show this. And it could be, now again, in the Rambam, this is very important. The Rambam really believes this. And he might be a little too extreme with it. Because the Rambam really believes that all spatial reasoning, for example, all is Dimion. It's something that a Dimion can do, but it's not how you should think about concepts. Not how you should think about real thought. And therefore, that's of course impossible to understand God that way, and you should not. The Rambam literally says, for example, the Rambam has a very clear exposition of this in the end of his Hamaspik. And he says, he goes through the psychology, and he says, of course, Dimion is not worth anything about God, because God doesn't look like anything, but Cycle is. And this difference is something that everyone after them misses for some reason. I think because they basically confuse Dimion and Cycle, at least in the Rambam framework. And of course, we could argue with this framework. We could argue with it, but you have to do it. You have to clarify what this means. And they seem, when all the things that most Achronim say are unknowable are really undimianable. And of course, it's very hard to Dimion. Infinity is very hard to Dimion. Bechlal, it's basically impossible to imagine things without. I don't think that's true, you see? Here, I'm not sure. The Rambam would say it's impossible to imagine something that doesn't have time and space, for example. Is that true? I don't know. Is it true? I don't even know if this is true, you see? And I don't know how true this is. Might not. Maybe we could. I don't know.
What does Dimion mean?
To him, have a picture in your mind.
I can't picture something that doesn't have a picture.
Why not? Why not? Try. Let's see. Try it. I think that the Mekabulim more or less. I think the Mekabulim more or less managed to do it, or at least they claim to manage to do it. You see?
What do you mean to picture something that doesn't have a picture? What
Yeah.
are you talking about?
Yeah.
How you picture something that doesn't have a picture? Doesn't have a picture. I mean, you can't picture the number 5.
Try.
You can't picture
Try.
it.
You could picture the number 5.
You have the concept.
You could picture the number 5.
That
There's actually research. There's actually people that claim that the number 5 has a color.
Really? What's it about?
No, you see, there might So it could be see. This is something very interesting. It could be There's people that you could look it up. It has a name. It's a condition. There's people that when they do math, they see colors and shapes and stuff. In other words, this goes back to real cognitive science to understand how the brain actually works. It could be that our brain. You could, of course, nobody is going to claim. See, this is the big difference. Nobody, even the Mekabulim, don't claim that their pictures are true. You see, nobody thinks that it's true, literally, right? But they say that it's not a worse symbolization than concepts. This is something we could seriously be choilek on the Rambam's sharp differentiation between Dimion and Cycle. Because to him, concepts actually track the universals. They actually track the forms, right? The word Udam, understood as the Tziras Udam, is really what Udam is like. Masha Einkein, the picture of Udam, there's no shaykhs with it, right? And you could argue with this. This is somewhat arbitrary even. You could say, why not? Maybe we could understand the picture of Udam to symbolize the figure. Maybe that's a better way of even. And the Mekabulim would even say, maybe even using space, like saying this is on the left, this is on the right. Of course, they don't think that there's left and right in Olam Atzilis. They say this openly. No Mekabul ever thought that there's really left and right in any real way. But they say that this is just as good a symbol. This is just as good a word as you would say, Tzira and Choy, whatever concept things. They're also just words. And they sort of say these two things. They say both that your concepts are also just images in a certain sense. They're not actually the way the world really is. They're just symbolizations. And number 2, maybe Dimion can be stretched further than you think. Maybe it's actually possible to imagine actually things, more things than you think are possible. And of course, you wouldn't be imagining the thing in itself. You'd be imagining how it's imagined. But the Rambam would say, and they would say, that's the difference. In your mind, right? In the Poel Mamish, it's all Yiddish not to make psulim. But in your mind, that's a big machloikas, real machloikas. The Rambam would think that by davening, you can only have abstract thoughts in your mind. And to him, that's a real... Of course, it's not crazy. But it would probably happen in words, right? And the Mekulim would say, okay, so you're having words. So what's the point? You might as well have shaimas and pictures, basically.
Right.
So that's a serious.
But not the actual.
Even yes, the actual. It's not rather. Once you see it as an image, again, once you see imagination as more capable than Rambam thinks it is, then a lot of things change. But not in the philosophical sense. You see, this is all practical, in a certain sense, practical questions. But in the philosophical sense, so this is. Again, and it could be you could actually collapse a little more imagination and intellect more than the Rambam does, and therefore these people say, since I can't imagine it, I don't even know what this means. Anyways, it sort of makes a little more sense if you think things like this. But in the Rambam's, I'm just trying to say that the Rambam is totally consistent. In his view, you can't imagine it, and you could think it, and it's easy to think it. It's not even hard. It's actually easier to think it than to think, because you don't need to imagine, you see? And the Mekbudim also sometimes use this language. I say, could you imagine existence without essence? For example, that's not exactly something to confuse enough people, but let's say you can imagine it. And you can imagine, you could think it, you can't imagine it. Because in your mind, you could separate the existence of something of what it is. Could you imagine it? No. So therefore, and I think this is actually something that's hard for people. People, if you're a Lamdan, it's easy, probably. This is that existence. There's two different things. Of course, you will never see existence without essence or essence without existence. So therefore what? I can separate them in my mind. But actually, many people seem to not be able to do this, including great people. They're literally not able to. And the Rambam would say you just don't have the fact, you don't have an neshama. You don't have the faculty to do this. I know a lot of people that are not able to do this. And actually, in a certain sense, a lot of modern philosophy is not able to do this, because they make arguments even to say that this is not making sense and so on. And then you end up saying that God is not knowable, and you end up saying, okay, therefore the only thing that's knowable is cows. And we should talk about cows. Macht sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not asking if it's maskuna, but yeah. But,
to which maskuna? That we should not do cows? Or yeah, do cows?
No, we should only do cows.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a good explanation for what's going on, but what is the kasha about? Well, now I at least have a certain view of why, again, why to the Rambam it makes sense to have Gan Eden be thought, and why for some reason other people are actioning as on imagination to exist there, in a certain sense. And if you think, for example, the Kabbalah is a great example of it, because the language of Kabbalah is 100% the language of Dimyan. It's literally a visual language.
Right.
And they claim this to be a better language than the conceptual language, but they seem to not get concepts sometimes. So it's very hard to know what's really going on. And sometimes, again, it's very hard because I'm judging people and so on. But an analogy is people that I know many people that I know people that don't get concept. They don't get the concept of a concept. They don't get a thing that can be separated in your mind and not in your imagination. Most people are like that, actually. I would go so far to think that. I think that yeshivas have a huge success rate in convincing people that these different differences could exist. And actually, most people, not many. I was talking with a bucha last week, a 20-year-old kid. Trying to explain him, what was it? He didn't get that there's a difference in a simon and a sibir, but it's the same thing. Muslim. And of course it's hard. I agree with him that it's hard. You have to have the capability to do this. Like, what's the nafkamina? It could be there's nafkamina. I'm not talking about the nafkamina. I'm talking about the concept. Is it this or that? Most people, and I think you need a huge amount of training to make this, for this to make sense to you. I really think so. I think that actually yeshivas are, the Litvish yeshivas, and most chassidim don't get it. People that think about Litvish yeshivas, they don't understand this thing b'chlal. I don't even know if everyone in yeshiva understands it. It could be they're just parroting things. But
no, I remember also when I was in yeshiva.
What?
No, I remember like mismeasures, like certain things, like.
Do you understand that a hakira?
I wasn't getting it, but then like 3 years later, it was like so.
Exactly,
like,
and it could be also some of them were talking nonsense. I'm not saying, like, like people make fun. Is this Zolvan Gemalit or it's Mali? What's the difference? Well, the two different concepts. It's true, but maybe it's not really different concepts. Maybe we're just drawing a couple with words. It's always a question. It's always a question. Are you just playing with words? But this thing, many people literally don't understand that a Hakira with Aranaf Kamina could make any sense. Maybe it's a waste of time. Okay, it's a waste of time, but that's another question. See? Another question. I keep on doing this, like, just dividing things. Okay, yeah, that's a good question, but that's not the same question as this. Is it a waste of time to have Hakiras that are only enough Kamina like this ish? Very possibly. Is it coherent, the difference? Yeah, it's only coherent. It doesn't make any difference? I don't know. Maybe it makes no difference. Maybe it's a waste of time. And I think that this is something, and this is something, I don't know, it's a good question to me. Again, sometimes I read people that say things very sure of themselves about theology, and they just seem to not get basic concepts. Or they don't get the concept of concepts. Anyone that says you can't understand, this is an example, right? You can't understand the Mal Nazman doesn't get it. Or they're just playing a game that could also always be true.
No, but get this, it's talking about it, that the happen in Dimyan. Yeah, but that's Unashi Sache. Yeah, but that's everything. A
sim, the difference between the two dinim and anything is only in Seichel, not in Dimyan.
I don't even know what it means. What are they saying?
Okay.
Huh?
Right. So okay. Lachli and I need. I'm trying to circle back. Therefore, I have to finish the shuttle. Therefore, if you don't know the difference between Seichel and Dimyan, then of course you think, and somehow you think that when you're learning halacha about Shorim and you're not talking about the concepts because you don't have the concept of concepts, then you don't have a ladder to get to God. Because the whole idea of getting to God in the Ram is used. First, I'll explain that a table is also not a table. There's a concept of a table. Then, okay, now you could separate. Now you can understand what a neshama is. Very simple. The concept of a table without the table is a neshama, and it's not really possible for a table. But according to people that believe in some sort of dualism, it is possible for a human neshama.
What?
Again, this is very basic, right? A table is also a concept besides for being a table, and the concept has real existence. It's not nominalistic, right? Because otherwise there wouldn't be a table; it would just be wood, right? Some organizing principle, you call it, or whatever. That's it. Now you could think about concepts as being separable somehow from a table. The concept of a table doesn't really exist without a table. It exists in your mind actually, without being in the table, right? Or in the mind of whoever made the table, or maybe in a book in a certain sense, but it doesn't really exist in anything else. Now we could think of the concept, the concept of the form of something existing without the thing entirely, and then we could figure out that humans have this amazing, and it's really amazing. By the way, this is something that if you never you should sometimes sit down and wonder about it, how it could be that we have a mind that gets abstract things. What does it even mean that we could know anything? It's really funny. There's this mushy
consciousness.
Not consciousness, knowledge. I don't know what consciousness means. And this kind of consciousness is another confusion that's based on this problem. Knowledge is weird. It's surprising that it exists, that human knowledge exists. Like Kayla says, the world fits into your brain. What does that even mean? The concept of the world fits in. What does that mean? That it works is really funny.
Right.
And then what the theory of the Rambam's theory basically is that this is the thing in itself. In other words, this is the abstractness of the world, or the form of things. Part of it somehow is in you, and it doesn't need to be in you. It could exist without you also. In other words, your brain, your mind, your mind, which is itself the concept of the thing, when it knows it, after it knows it, can exist without you too. And that's basically what the Shuras HaNefesh means to him. It makes total sense. And that is basically one with the God that it knows. And only real object of contemplation would be God, because that's the only real thing. And the fact that we can even think about Choshen Mishpat is only because there's a world where Choshen Mishpat exists. But that whole world is contingent and doesn't really need to exist. So it's not a real thing. Shine, and that's how we get to only thinking of God being a worthwhile thing to do with your time.
Oh, yeah.
At the very short version of how we got to that. And since people don't even know the difference between imagination and intelligence, intellect, then of course none of this makes any sense to them. So maybe that's the real reason why this is all the end of the Shala. Why the yeshivas? The Shala is why the yeshivas, and when the yeshivas do lamdas, they're doing it with their imagination. This is what would happen. This is really the question. They don't realize that they're working with forms at all, with concepts, or it's just about familiarity. Could be.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a din? Did you ever see a din?
No, but it's
what do you mean?
much easier to work with lamdas, Yeah.
It's not easier. How is it easier? And nobody ever saw a din. And none of the things that nobody ever saw a gavra, by the way. The gavra is not a person, right? The gavra from the gavra and the chefza, nobody ever saw him. It's not possible to see him. In principle, it's impossible to see him. Right? He doesn't have material existence. It's an idea.
Yeah, okay.
So this is one of the things going on. At least one of the things going on. Wow, I didn't even get to all the other things.
No, but people know. It's called, in the Lamdish Welt, it's called Megashim. Megashim.
What are you Megashim?
Megashim Devart.
No.
Devart, okay. So they hold. So that's a big avodah in the Yeshivish world.
No.
But that's what people do a lot. It's a big avodah. Not only very few people. The real long them aren't Megashim.
How? Give me an example. I don't know.
Like say no. You want me to say the word more? No, I don't want to say it more. No, I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say it more. Magash the word. Like you're too. The task is siful up. You're magash in it. I don't know. I've been doing this a long time.
No, give you an example. Example. Yeah. You magash him something.
whatever. When you say the word too much, too see Behizkashmis, and it doesn't hold water, and it's push nicht so because it felt people do it because it becomes like very sticky, like it doesn't work. I don't know. It's a schwer how I can't get it. Oh yeah, like. Yeah, like in ninth grade, they do that a lot. Like, is a get, eine get, somebody gives so a get, and then from Himmel kommt up and she becomes Mekadeshes, or the actual doing it. No, but that's where he too novice and those don't. I don't know. Whatever. No, then the Chayden, I think the Yeshivish the Choshe the Pshimon a lot for that.
Yeah, but that's different. Different machlokes.
Too bezgashmis. The Werter of Zaire is stark rausgebracht, you know. With buckets.
Okay, I have to think about all of that. It's different. I think it's a little slightly different.
No, but what I'm saying is that's for kids. The Oil was very neuter. There are very few real London.
But maybe that's because they don't.
Everybody's trying to get to London.
You think that they're making
everybody's trying to get to the London. They're not really.
Yeah.
Most people aren't getting it. Really.
They're making it too Megishim or too not Megishim.
They're trying
maybe
not
what
to make Megishim, but at the end of the day, they're being Megashim because the only way they're able to do it.
Maybe what they're making, what they call being Megashim, really means understanding, and they don't like to understand.
No, because it's not. No. It can't be that understandable, you know, because it's not, they just push it because it's really. What are you saying? What do you just say? Like people.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Like say it in English, you know, like. Yeah, no.
There's other reasons why. There's other reasons why. There's other reasons why. How do you call it? Why all this happens, but I think this is a big part of this puzzle, big part of the story, and it's very funny to me why. I'm not sure. I don't know. I would want things to make a little more sense. Like, how could it be that people mamish don't understand the difference between imagination and seichel? Like, what does this even mean? Do they have a theory of human cognition that said there's no such a thing as seichel? That's really what's going on. Because I know people have such theories, man. It's not crazy. Maybe it is crazy, but it's not.
They try to them to fish it out in their mind.
Okay, so they didn't read the Rambam and they're making stuff up, and then they said, we'll just use borrowing concepts. Maybe first read it, and then you'll see what he meant, and maybe it makes sense by itself. And so.
Well, you know, like, I told like the most funny thing. Like, no, like, even like Yeshiva, it's like a sculpt. You know, sure, sculpting.
One more thing that we have to importantly consider into this whole thing is the question of Tamei Mitzvahs and how it relates to all of this. Now, Tamei Mitzvahs, in other words, the question of what all the laws in both in nature and in this mean. Because part of this whole thing is that he thinks that mitzvahs are generally just random things that God said, that they're only valuable because God said them. The Tanya. He literally says this, mitzvahs are rutzen and so on. And therefore, 1 minute.
But it goes into the bria and everything.
Yeah, whatever, but it doesn't have a reason why it's like that. And therefore, I'm not sure therefore what. Therefore, there's something big connection between.
If you want to, let's say Tamei Mitzvahs is because of some type of reason, whatever. Like let's say
no, Tamei Mitzvahs is just.
You still need a reason why God made such a world that you should need.
No, I don't think it actually. No, I don't know. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true. Depends. I'll think about that another time. I don't know if that's true. That's another like very too simple question to ask, which obviously doesn't make sense, right?
Why?
That's why.
Why is the world like once you believe in the Chiddush, like so why?
No, it's the other way around. 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 I can't get into that. I'm trying just to have to make a note. I don't know. I'm not remembering now, or not clear how it works together. But again, for example, this question that we say, okay, you're saying that Torah is valuable because it's understanding God, and it's not actually understanding God. You see, this is the weird thing. It's only understanding Rutzen, which is arbitrary, the B'nai Shelah, and then you don't understand anything.
Okay, so.
So there's nothing to understand. By definition, if I just choose something for no reason, like the tiny, like this, Babbage just say Tava can take much can cash this, which is totally false, by the way. Tavas are totally understandable. I don't know where you got this idea that people have Tavas that are random. Which people did he know that are like this? I don't know any people like this. All Tavas make total sense that I know of. Some of them are mistakes, but they all make sense. Do you know anyone person that has random, arbitrary Tzoynis and Tavas? I've never heard of such a thing. What do you mean?
What I like ice cream.
Tavas, you really don't understand why you like ice cream? I can explain you.
Why?
There's constantly literally a biological understand claim.
So biological, there's no reason for that.
What do you mean there's no reason? What do you mean by a reason? Now, if you want to speak in an essential sense, there's also a reason. What do you mean? Ice cream literally makes more of you in an enjoyable way. What's so hard? And nothing unexplained over here.
No.
There's nothing unexplained. It's not a mystery. No scientist thinks that Tavas are a mystery. Tavas have the most understandable things. Of course, why there's some weird Tavas, then the Tavas says that it's a mistake. You shouldn't have those Tavas. That's why we have a Torah to not have those Tavas, you see. Something very funny with being mad with everything on Tavas when you're against Tavas. Come on. And besides, this whole theory of Tavas is just Nashtissim. This whole theory of human roots and being arbitrary is Shtissim. It comes out of something. It's because of something. What do you mean? Most Tavas are actually in Torah. You get into specifics. Most Tavas, all Tavas that I know of are 100% the logical conclusion of a human being that wants to survive. I don't even understand. Evolution makes the Tavas. What's so hard to understand? What do you mean? What does it even mean there's no cash on Tavas? Of course you can have a cash on Tava. I can even explain you why certain Tavas are irrational. I don't know why we're Chabad. This is not only Chabad. This is B'chlal Lamad and Shagon. You like, you like pizza. Exactly, you like pizza because your body is telling you that you need to eat, otherwise you'll die. But let me explain you. There's a shtickle mistake here, theoretically, because at some level, this signal, you're not interpreting the signal correctly. The signal is saying you're hungry, but it's not really hungry for pizza. You just ate too many things with a lot of sugar that you hacked your brain to think that this is a mistake. It's a mistake. To want to eat only pizza is a mistake. I'm not saying maybe you like once a week. It's a mistake because it's reasonable. It's actually logical. I don't know, logical is the wrong word. It makes sense why you should eat pizza, and it's actually a mistake to eat only pizza. I don't know where they got this. People, even modern people, I feel that I have to. Yeah, I can. Let's think why you feel that, and let's think if this actually matches to what you really want. That's basically right. You don't really want to eat only pizza. You really want to survive, and if you eat only pizza, you won't survive. So you don't really want that, right? It's a shtickle mistake. What's the problem? I think I keep on going around saying that you could have mistaken emotions. Nobody gets it. And just like you can have mistaken thoughts, you can have mistaken emotions. Why not? Anyways, that's another thing. And the same thing, but I'm saying that since just get back to when I wanted to finish. Since he thinks that mitzvahs are not really about anything, they're about arbitrary decisions of God, then really he doesn't believe that you could understand even that.
What do you mean?
Because if he would tell me, look, he doesn't Lemushal say, maybe he does, that Chosh Mishpat is better for this than Kachim. Let's say, for example. Because going to this theory, going by this theory that Nigla is better than Ista because we understand it better, he should also say something very similar, that he should also say B'chlal that rational theology is better than supernatural theology because we understand it better. Same logic. Why does he keep on talking to me about supernatural theology? Why does he think that natural theology is not enough? Why can't the same... Let's say there's parts of God which... Why does he think Soyev is more important than Amala? And that's kind of dish. Stop it. You just told me that it's better. We should focus on things that we understand. And B'chlal, why doesn't he say... Maybe he does say this, I'm not sure. That, like Reutzel Hachem, why didn't Chosh Mishpat better than Rechaim for this? Because at least it's more or less based on human reason. But he would be mad if you say that, because then it's not godly. You see, because to him godly means based on God's arbitrary commands, arbitrary wills, which basically means that there's no understanding of anything in the world.
You had 4 glasses of milk already?
I was lichting 110.
Was die Kapazität?
Ich fach Couch, ich fach mit dem mein Leben. Totally fighting. I don't think it's worth. I think that he's good at explaining things that he explains them. He writes them down better than he can say them. And shine, so... I'm just saying... And therefore, of course, it doesn't make any sense to him. This is really why it doesn't make any sense to him to say that science is Chachmas Hashem. Because there's no such thing as Chachmas Hashem, basically. There's only roots in Hashem, and he doesn't have a mitzvah somewhere that says learn science. I don't know. Why wouldn't he say that, Taka? Does he really think that nature is only roots in Hashem and not Chachmas Hashem? Is that what he thinks? I don't know. Which is just a weird thing to think, actually, in a certain sense. Really, gravity could have worked differently, and just God randomly decided it to work like this. So therefore, okay, so then it's literally the same thing like mitzvahs. What's the difference? Not sure. Maybe it is. Maybe he really thinks there is. Lavav Shirav has a pshatl in that shtickle Tanya that it really means this, you know? Someone sent me. That when that whole shtickle about Chachmas Tzionis is really trying to say whether, I don't know, whole pshatl, that is really making a new heter, not a new issa. That you could learn Chachmas Tzionis Lishma, not only Shleh Lishma. I don't remember what his pshatl is, but it has some pshatls, maybe.
So, here.
Because he has a tzaddik that it says not only kad. There's one teretz that says kadam lachbebam. There's another teretz that's laved Hashem. I don't know. Okay. Anyways, Adkan.
So what do you plan to do? So what do we do next?
Then we have to go through the other things. We have to do all of the really. This is all another akdama. Like this what it did today is sort of the second part is also the concept, which is to try to explain the concept of knowledge and imagination and all of that, which actually. It's a big schlissel for this, and then we have to think about. Mostly, we have to do next the concept of science, and the concept of how do we understand the world and how, and what to do with that. That's really where I want to get, and then we'll move on. Then we'll see what else happens. So basically, we know things.